I would say that in terms of good semi/generic support, Fire is about in the middle. There are three major archetypes which are bolstering the count. Flamewell, or more accurately Fire Monsters with 200 defense, Fire Kings, and Salamangreat. Although that last one is not so obvious, as Burning Draw and Rising Fire do not have Salamangreat in their name. In terms of theming, Fire gets a lot of effects dealing with destruction and burn damage, and Backfire combines both. When a fire monster is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, by any means, burn the opponent for 500 damage. This is not once per turn, but does trigger only once if multiple monsters are destroyed at the same time. Multiple copies of the card will all burn for the same instance of destruction, so this card can function as a win condition. You're probably not using it to ram UFO turtles into your opponent's monsters, but that is an option. This card also synergizes really well with Fire Kings, without playing Sacred Phoenix of Nifs at least. And even though that deck revolves around destroying your own monsters, a lot of Fire decks in older formats can still benefit from Backfire. This card does have a retrain, Kickfire, but that card is trash. However, the lore callback is just perfect. It rhymes like poetry. Another good burn option is Spiritual Fire Art Kurenai, which tributes a fire monster, then burns for the original attack points. This can be a way to get a little value out of a monster which is being targeted for removal, or possibly as an alternate win condition under Gravity Bind. I am still on the fence about whether or not teching in burn cards is a viable strategy, because effect damage is sacrificing card advantage and not developing your board. In other words, not advancing the game state for most decks. Maybe there will be a video about that internal debate one day. But let's get back on topic with Flamewell Counter. This counter trap stops spells and traps, but requires you to banish a fire monster with 200 defense from grave. And I love the way that this card straddles the line between archetype and generic support, where this is definitely a Flamewell card, but also a counter trap, but also a counter trap, which could be negated by counter, the counter trap. Can counter counters? Okay, I will stop. The reason I bring this up is because the card is searchable, but not in archetype. Battling Boxer Uppercutter adds counter traps from deck to hand. Then, when sent to the graveyard by card effect, can either revive a Battling Boxer, or reset a counter trap from grave to field. That's the last time I say counter in this video. After this sentence, I swear. What is so cool about this interaction is that Uppercutter has 200 defense points, which would make that particular Flamewell card online, especially when recycled. Ooh, I just love the archetype mixing potential. But even on its own, this is good negation. Practically 1 for 1, but banishing is still a cost. Especially when we talk about the other fire support card from the same set, Rekindling. Just the text, special summon as many as possible, is exciting and scary. You can easily go +4 after setup. It is restricted to just 200 defense point fire monsters, and banishes them during the end phase, but you're probably going to use them for Synchro, Xyz, or Link material before then. This isn't even once per turn, so if you do Synchro or Link climb, you can instantly recycle those monsters. This card is ridiculous. This card is so ridiculous, it has had some brushes with the FNL list, so keep that in mind with older format play. Rekindling is intended as Flamewell and or Laval support, but is not explicitly so. Unlike Burgeoning Whirlflame, this type of trap card which negates other trap cards. But unlike the other Flamewell card, has the cost to discard a Laval monster from hand to grave. This response is more narrow, but I actually want to talk about the other effect. This card can self-recycle by banishing 2 fire monsters, which reminds me of the Divine Sword Phoenix Blade. At least enough for me to think that this card may have some secondary utility somewhere. Maybe recurring discard fodder, but that might be a reach. It is included to be thorough though. Sealing Ceremony of Catan has a fair use case, but the cost can be a little steep. Once per turn, banish a fire monster from graveyard along with a card from your opponent's graveyard. Graveyard disruption is valuable, but the opportunity cost is pretty high. So many fire cards banish as a cost, or want to revive cards from your grave. I think that this is a good side deck card though, where you can play it if your opponent is bringing a graveyard-focused deck. I actually feel this way about all 4 Sealing Ceremonies, but we will get to see the other 2 spins on the formula later. Now, we can talk about Circle of the Fire Kings. Once per turn, you can destroy a fire monster to revive a fire monster in grave. The Fire King synergy is obvious, but you can also use it to dodge removal, or cheat out a bigger monster, or get some value out of a destruction effect, or even a destruction trigger. Excellent card, although try not to go -1 when using it. It is a quick play spell for a reason. Let's move on to the other Fire King ? Support card. High Tide on Fire Island. This is our first case of a card being support for multiple attributes independently. For simplicity, we're only caring about the fire effect this time. If you control a level 7 or higher fire monster, destroy a monster on the field, which can be your opponent's. Then you discard a card, if you have one in hand. This can be an okay removal option, but the card really shines in a fire and water deck. And you know that I built a Fire King Mermail deck when this card came out. It had Frost and Flame Dragon too, but that is really getting far ahead into the monster-based support cards. Let's keep it to just Spell and Traps for now. Rising Fire is the next card, which is sort of like a fiery premature burial. Well, a fixed version. No life point cost, but you cannot control monsters when you activate it. It does give the monster 500 attack points, which is something, I guess. It makes more sense in Archetype, to be honest. Then, when Rising Flame leaves the field, that monster is destroyed. But if Rising Fire is destroyed by an opponent's card effect, you can banish a monster on the field, which makes it potentially function as removal. This card is cool, helping to solve the equip problem of your opponent getting a free 2-for-1. It is once per turn though, which in addition to destroying the monster when it leaves the field, is why I say that this is a fixed version of Premature Burial. I think the balance point is just spot on though. From one unlabeled Salamangreat card to another, we have Burning Draw. If your opponent controls more cards than you do, you get to draw cards equal to the link rating of one of your opponent's monsters. This is once per turn, but wow, you can net like 4 or 5 cards. This card is amazing! But why is it fire support? Well, this card has a lockout effect, restricting you to only summoning fire monsters. To be clear, if you summon a non-fire monster, you cannot activate Burning Draw that turn. Some lockout effects take place after a card is activated. This is the other kind. There is a philosophical question about why this is considered fire support, because it's really just a non-fire lockout card. But I guess that means it does something for only fire decks, even if it does not necessarily operate on fire monsters. In the right situation, this card is still amazing, even if it can severely limit your play options. Let's take a short break from Salamangreat with Birth of the Prominence Flame, which is both another 200 defense support card and Synchro support. Banish a tuner and a non-tuner monster with 200 defense to special summon a fire synchro from your extra deck. Rekindling looks like a better option, but you could run both. There is one benefit to Prominence Flame though, as it can be used to cheat out certain synchro monsters. Maybe Turbo Cannon for removal, or the much better option, Sword Soul Sinister Sovereign, Qixing Long Yuan. That is a really strong boss monster, but major setup would still be required. I like this card too. Strong, slightly restrictive, and with a fun flavor. Let's get back to another Salamangreat card. Salamangreat Charge is modal, and both effects are pretty relevant. The first is a recycle, shuffling 2 of your fire monsters from graveyard or banishment into the deck, while special summoning a third, although its effects are negated and it cannot attack. Net neutral card advantage, potential play extension, and recycling banished fire monsters, this card does a lot without even looking at the second effect. That option requires a fire Ritual, Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, or Link monster, whose attack is different from its original attack, which sounds way more difficult a condition than it actually is. Pretty much any competitive deck can make at least one of those types of monsters, although the change in attack points requirement can be tricky to fulfill. The payoff is targeted destruction, which on a quick play spell can be pretty useful. I think the element of choice in this card really seals the deal for me though. Let's wrap up the TCG fire support with Fire Recovery. You can target a fire monster in your graveyard, send a card from hand to grave, then special summon that monster. This is a little expensive for play extension or recycling, but the second effect allows you to shuffle 3 fire monsters from grave and or banishment into the deck, and then draw a card. This effect is once per turn, but can be activated the same turn it is sent to the graveyard. This feels like a remix of Salamangreat Charge, and I am all for it. That is it for the current TCG card pool, but let's quickly peek into the OCG to see one more option. Oil! This card is probably going to have a name change to something like oil drilling or oil refining, but I just love the name oil. It's so simple, and I hope that they keep this translation. The effect is, quote, target up to 2 level 4 or lower fire monsters with different names in your graveyard, add them to your hand. You can only activate 1 oil per turn. This is Burning Salvage, which is both better and worse. Level 4 or lower is debatably a better restriction than 1500 or less attack points, or even 0 defense when thinking about Recurring Nightmare. But it's really up to personal taste and deck construction. Per turn feels unwarranted, but is still good future-proofing. I'm not sure when this card will be imported to the TCG, but I still wanted to mention it. Now onto my competitive picks. Starting with the cards with broader use cases. I'm going to partially endorse Spiritual Fire Art Kurunai, which is the best spiritual art, although it is very deck and format dependent. Circle of the Fire Kings is a lot of fun and pretty flexible. Burning Draw is really good draw support, but only against link decks, so it might also be format dependent. Finally, Salamangreat Charge, Fire Recovery, and Oil are all good recycle and recovery options. Talking about the 200 defense support, Rekindling is still amazing. Then finally, Birth of the Prominence Flame has a niche use case. I think Fire is in a really good spot when there are good removal, draw, recycle, play extension, and even burn options. Add that on top of several different Fire archetypes with various levels of competitive usage, and now you're cooking with gas. Or cooking with oil, I guess. Don't end on a bad pun. Next time, we lighten things up a bit.